Hello, and welcome to our third vlog. Sometimes I call this a podcast, but this is actually a video podcast, I guess you call it, for the Journal for Leadership and Instruction. I am Dr. Richard Bernardo. I am the newly minted editor-in-chief of this journal. I'm pleased to be able to do that. And one of the things I was asked to do was to establish a podcast series, and that's where we're about to continue with today. We've instituted a monthly podcast series to showcase exemplary and scholarly research in concert with true application possibilities as well, in order to improve leadership practices practically as well as theoretically, and make it right by students and by the staff who serve those students. The intent has been that the viewers will obviously enjoy Dr. Parmar's conversation with me in a few minutes, and then you'll be able to marinate in that and then take it to the next place in terms of your understanding how it might apply to your own leadership or instructional decisions. Exemplary research is part of what we do, and when I think of the word exemplary, that barely captures what I think of Dr. Parmar. Worked with Dr. Parmar, I suppose, close to 10 years in different capacities. I work for her, I should say, is a better word. And I will let her give you a description of her unique background and all the muscles and strengths that she has as an educational leader, as an administrator, and as a researcher in a moment. I think I'll let it go from at that point. I will tell everyone before I forget that if you haven't had a chance to see this particular article, the article is entitled Special Education and Ratings of School Leadership. It's out of our spring 2021 publications series. And you can easily find it when you go to the website. When you go to this website, you'll see our show notes, and you can hit that link and look for spring 2021, and you'll be able to read the entire article. Again, if I can call you Rene, if it's all right with you.
Absolutely.
I feel more comfortable calling you Dr. Parmar. So Dr. Parmar, if you could just give us some of your background, and then we'll take off.
Thank you so much, Rich. Let me just say how delighted I am to be here today talking to you. I have had a wonderful experience publishing with the Journal of Leadership and Instruction. The staff have been tremendously supportive, and I'm so glad that my research is there, and I hope that it is relevant to your readership. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you more about this. The article itself is about leadership for special education students. And this has been a kind of combination of my interests. I began my career as a special education teacher. I worked then as a curriculum developer. I've worked in the development of assessments. And then more recently, I moved to working with leadership programs. And so the idea of bringing together my interest as an educator, directly working with students with special education needs, and the issues of leadership in schools so that students are best supported has been at the forefront of my research these past few years. In this particular study that is published in your journal, I continued my research with some data from New York City schools. New York City has a practice every year of administering what they call the school survey. This is a large-scale survey based on the research of the framework for great schools that emanated from Brick and colleagues in Chicago. The survey is conducted annually, and it invites responses from three important groups of stakeholders. One of them are the educators themselves in New York City schools, the teachers. The second group are the parents of the students who are involved in education in the schools. And the third group is the students themselves. And so the students also have a voice with regard to some of the dimensions of the framework. In this particular study, I focus on the responses of teachers. And I'm looking particularly at teachers' ratings of effective leadership. So within the framework, there are actually 6 dimensions, but this particular article looks at teacher ratings of effective leadership. And the question that I had as I began to conceptualize this study was the degree to which the representation of special education students in schools impacts teacher perceptions of school leadership. When I say representation, I simply mean the percent of students who are identified as having special education needs present in a school at any given time. In New York City schools, this is quite a high percent as compared to the national average. There are many schools with up to 23% of students identified as having some kind of learning need. These might be students who are in inclusive classrooms, which is an increasing practice in recent years, based on mandates and based on policy and based on incentives to schools. Or they may be students who are in self-contained classrooms. And these are settings where students who have greater learning and behavioral needs are often placed so that they can have an increased amount of adult support from special education teachers and paraprofessionals in those settings. So the research was looking at the teacher ratings of school effectiveness with this context of special education representatives.
And essentially, as you said, the rating system that you're using is out of BRIC, which is a terrific source of information for lots of people to use. And you said there was, I think, 19 questions out of the one piece that you needed to do to have the teachers rate back on how the teachers perceived the effectiveness of them. And I'm presuming that there are several factors that we need to speak to.
That is correct. So when teachers think about the leadership in their school, they have several different, different categories in which they consider these perceptions. And so they look overall, of course, at the school leaders' management, of the school building, but they also look at the leaders' engagement in the instructional practices in the school. They also look at the leaders' engagement in their own professional support as they implement the curriculum and as they implement programs for students with diversity of needs. So those are the kinds of things that the questions ask about in terms of school leadership, and that's what teachers are most directly affected by.
And then if you slice the responses down that much further, you found some premises that, on the one hand, may be kind of obvious. On the other hand, suggest other pieces to think about.
Correct. So in this particular research study, I began by looking at the correlation between teachers' ratings of overall effectiveness of the school leaders and the various dimensions of school leadership that are there present in the survey. And one of the things that does come out in this sort of broader analysis is that the teachers' perceptions are impacted by the percent of special education students' representation in the school, and negatively impacted to a statistically significant level by the percent of students in self-contained classrooms in particular. And so these data, these sort of broad data, made me think about, what are the actual item level responses, and what does that say to us about things that principals may be considering as they work with the teachers in their school and as they implement their leadership. And one of the things that I think is the case with programs, schools that have very many special education self-contained classrooms, is that there is a need to have a lot of parent engagement in these settings in order to support the school program, in order to ensure that the programming is consistent with all the guidelines, and to provide the best possible educational outcomes for the students concerned. So principals in schools like that with high special ed representation and high self-contained classrooms often spend 20 hours or more per week working directly with this subgroup of students within their school. Now, when you think about that in terms of all the different demands on a principal's time, that's a huge amount of time that they devote to this. However, a lot of principal preparation programs don't really talk a lot about what are going to be some of the things that principals are going to have to face. And in my own experience of leadership preparation, very often there isn't inclusion of some kind of information on working with special education students and their families, but it often is limited to covering some of the basic definitions, some of the basic legal issues, and perhaps a little bit of some incidents that have kind of made the national news. But on a day-to-day basis, principals are actually, working with parents, trying to find the best possible placement option that is appropriate for that student. And that requires a great deal of thought and also a consideration of the resources. And so principals often find themselves in a very difficult situation of balancing what they believe is social justice in practice in terms of inclusion, and what is available on offer within their district in terms of the resources that they have. And so it's clear that, no one individual can make this determination alone. And I think this particular situation requires the engagement of all the possible stakeholders so that the best possible practice can be followed. So that's just, one example of sort of the balancing act that goes on in this situation. Another area, and this refers to supporting teachers, is the aspect of professional development and supports. So very often, the mandates call for collaborative teaching and inclusive teaching, but very often the teachers involved in this practice are not sufficiently prepared to act in collaboration. They're exceptional professionals in their own right, in the environments for which they have been prepared. But that special sort of extra step of collaboration needs the leadership, I feel, of the school building individual who's in charge of the programs, because that requires engaging in helping teachers engage in conversations with each other, building professional communities of practice, time management so that teachers do have collaborative planning time. It requires teachers to also understand the perspectives of each other. Classroom teachers are typically very concerned with curriculum coverage. They are very much under pressure with mandates for testing and student outcomes in academics. Whereas teachers who work with students with special education needs may be focusing on cognitive issues that the student encounters, memory, comprehension, retention, things like that. They may be focused on the behavioral issues that help the students stay paying attention, stay engaged in the classroom, and also managing their own behavioral challenges. And so the two groups of teachers need to have that common conversation, and that's where the school leader has a key role in facilitation.
Could not agree with you more. For sure, that's an issue. Having been on both sides of the street, as far as that's concerned, as a building principal myself for a long time, I made a few mistakes about that along the way, I'll confess. But I'm thinking out loud, Dr. Parmar, by also thinking about what I sometimes call the message behind the music. What's really underneath some of these things that principals do or don't do, or not able to do, or don't want to do. And that's sometimes something about, I would say, about something that fascinates me, which is the whole process of decision making. And decision making is grounded in values. You make a decision based on what your values see you to, what the preferred future is, insofar as how you think that might be defined. And if I'm working 20 hours a week, in air quotes, throwing my energy towards making life right by those children and by those teachers weekly, that suggests to me that there certainly is a priority in terms of their value system. At the same time, other things could potentially be suffering from that. And maybe I think I read in one part, I did read in your article how principals who paid more attention to their achievement levels weren't necessarily the ones who took the time, if I understood it correctly, to make all the other pieces fit. And so there's that balancing act. And it's troublesome to me to come back to your point. And I thought that rang my bell when I reread your article this morning of social justice and how we make all those pieces align in a system, an overall system that doesn't necessarily want to hear that bell ring all the way around.
Sure, sure, Rich. I think you're absolutely touching on a very key aspect. And so one of the things that we think about now in developing school leaders and supporting them is that when they make broad planning decisions regarding their school, the question comes up, to what extent do they consider it to be very typical or normal to incorporate the needs of students with special education classifications in their planning? Or is it considered by some to be atypical and not normal? And so if you take the view that this is just normal practice, that I'm just going to do this as a matter of course, and I'm just going to embrace this as my way of thinking, then it's much more likely that the program is going to have that holistic feel to it where everyone is working together. On the contrary, if the perspective is, oh, this is something that is asking of me something so unusual that it's burdensome, and that it's going to ask of my staff something very unusual and out of the ordinary, then that attitude is going to permeate through the school, and it's going to lead to a feeling that anything that is done for students that have extraordinary learning needs is something that is not part of the plan, and so it's extra and it's a burden. So I think one of the things that we think about is working with school leaders to have that thinking be part of their long-term planning and part of their holistic planning. And I have to say, there's so many principals who embrace this. They are truly committed to moving forward. Sometimes they confess that they haven't had a lot of preparation in the area, but they're happy to try to access as many resources as they can to engage in that kind of strategic planning. And that attitude also permeates into their conversations and interactions with parents and other community stakeholders. And so if you have it in your plan, and if you have it as part of your whole thinking that all students are going to benefit from the program, then you're less likely to frame things as a win or a loss, and those are words that have come up in prior research in this topic, that sometimes principals think that if they have to allocate certain resources to a group of students, it's kind of a loss. And then there's others who are not winning because they're losing, that kind of thing. And so I think that having that holistic plan, having that long-term perspective, and having that inclusive perspective helps communicate to everyone in the community that the gain is there for everyone. It's not a winning and losing proposition. It's like everyone is benefiting from the ways in which the program is supporting all students.
We're going to stop the conversation right there, because that last sentence should be a bumper sticker for professional development programs, for hiring practices, and both of administrators and of teachers, and the teachers, and of having the community understand what that's all about as well. Time is not necessarily finite. I never think of that as time is finite, because once you give that into that, then you have to decide who goes on the kidney machine, who doesn't, and that's not the way we should be operating. Beautifully said, Dr. Parmar. I know we could keep you forever on here. There's so many implications of this in terms of higher education preparation programs. I think is an issue to talk about, as well as ongoing professional development for everyone, to keep everyone up to date and understanding about the spirit of the law rather than the letter. So with that, I do thank you. I very much, I do appreciate this, as I've said a couple of times. When this goes up, I'm not sure when it'll be up inside of a couple of weeks, I suppose. There'll be my email address will be there. So if anyone has a question that they'd like to send to me or pose to Dr. Parmar, rather than bother Dr. Parmar straight away, I'll take it, I'll field it, and I'll pass it to Dr. Parmar as appropriate, Dr. Parmar. I'm not going to overload you with it, I promise. But we'll continue the conversation the viewers' best interest and for those of the students who everybody is worried about up the road. So I thank you again, Dr. Parmar, and I very much appreciate all of what you do for so many of us.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll be delighted to continue this research and engage with people who are interested in following up on the whole topic of special education leadership. I've been very fortunate to meet some of our national researchers on the topic, read their work, and of course our New York City DOE partners with whom I work a lot related to this research and related to other aspects of preparing educators and school leaders. And of course, throughout Long Island and the region, there are many, many, many school leaders whom I know personally through the program. And I just am so proud of the work that they're doing and the way that they're supporting all their students. So I'm just delighted to continue this conversation in the future. Thank you again.
That would be great. And I will say to the viewers as well that those of you considering research, if you think about just some of the things we spoke about in this brief time, there's plenty of opportunities for you to consider in terms of submitting to our journal or another journal that also has the same kinds of interest and dedication to making it right. Thank you so much again, Dr. Parmar.
All right. Take care.